Hi, today is June 7th, 2020, and I'm interviewing my friend Mia Hansen. Hey, Mia.
Hey, Michael.
So let's start out by talking a bit about your childhood. A little bit about your parents and your brother and kind of your early experiences in life.
Sure. Well, my parents, definitely big influence in my life. They were immigrants from Denmark, and they immigrated to America in 1950, which was a few years before we were born, my brother and I. So they were hardworking Danes who left Europe after World War II. And the reason they came here is they had seen America on a unique traveling opportunity. They were gymnasts and traveled on something called the National Danish Gymnastics Team. At the time, it was Flensted Jensen's Gymnastikhold. Flensted Jensen was a entrepreneurial guy who loved Danish style of gymnastics, which is very different than what we think of. It's not the Olympic type of artistic gymnastics, but it's more of a group exercise thing. And the Danes still practice this today, and it's very much a social activity. It's a great exercise activity. My parents were selected to travel around the world in 1947 on this gymnastics team, and they saw America. And at the time, of course, having just come out of World War II with rationing and occupation by the Nazis, America did look like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And my father, especially quite an entrepreneur, decided that's America was the place to be. And so they immigrated and made their way across America. And, I tell you this because it kind of portends for the future for my life. I also became interested in travel and moving and being in different places. And I think my parents obviously had that love and had that adventurous spirit. So they ended up settling down in Oregon, where they had seen Oregon on their tour with the gymnasts. And there was a little Danish community in Junction City, Oregon, near Eugene, Oregon, that had a bunch of Danes who were also immigrants, and that group welcomed them. And my dad set up shop in Roseburg, Oregon, about an hour south of Junction City. But they kept close touch with their Danish friends. And they made new friends, of course. My father became a plumbing contractor, and he's had his own business, was an entrepreneur and a businessman. And my mother, Inga, so my father's name is Eric, my mother, Inga, she also was quite innovative. This gymnastics background, of course, continued. And she ended up being a fitness teacher at the local YMCA in Roseburg, Oregon. There's a plaque on the wall in the memory of Inga Hansen because she was one of the first women to do innovative things like go jogging. Nobody jogged in the 60s anywhere. It was very odd. So she would get a group of women, and they actually got the city to make a sawdust covered running track close to the YMCA, and they would go jogging, and people would stop their cars and say, "Are you guys okay? What are you running away from?" "Oh, no, exercising." So, fitness and exercise was a big part of our lives, of course, growing up. And my mother would take me as an infant. She would take me to the YMCA class and do exercises with me as a kid, which was, again, very Danish, swinging me around. And so that women could get physical exercise while they were, being at home with their children. And my mother also embraced the teachings of Bonnie Pruden, who was a great American fitness leader at the time. And so that my life was wonderful growing up. We grew up in a small town of Winston outside of Roseburg, about 1,000 people in that town, on a piece of property that had a couple of acres. And my big brother Mark and I were adventurous, and we grew up in the great outdoors and freedom to go and explore and be outside. And I remember riding my bicycle 15 miles into Roseburg on like a logging road very early. My parents just, "Okay, goodbye, have fun." So, we had freedom, we had confidence, and perhaps that was a big part of that was my parents' Danish upbringing and background, which was unique. In Winston, Oregon, they were the only foreigners, I guess you'd say. And so they were quite well known in the community because of their joy of life and what they did. My father, of course, became part of the school board, and my mother being a fitness, both of them taught fitness, and my father taught PE classes occasionally at the high school when I was in high school to share the Danish style of gymnastics and folk dancing. So growing up was great back then, back in the good old days, I guess you'd say. When
What were your high school years like? You were a cheerleader? Is that right?
Sure. Well, I grew up, like I say, in a very small town in a very small high school called Douglas High School, which, by the way, right now is undergoing some renovation for the first time ever since Douglas High School was built. And they, being in a small town was perfect for me. I was then and still am kind of an overachiever. So I got to do everything. I was a cheerleader. I also was on the basketball team for the girls. So I would cheerlead for the boys team and play on the girls team, played all 4 years of high school as the starting point guard. Little fact here, Michael, because I know you love basketball. I led the team and had the record for a while at Douglas High School in assists, steals, and turnovers in one game. So I guess I was fast, but I couldn't quite hold the ball that well either. But I also did every sport that I could. I played tennis. We were allowed to do dual sports if you could handle it. So in this fall, I would run cross country and play basketball. In the spring, I would play volleyball and tennis and run track and field. So, everybody could kind of do everything if you could handle it. And then, of course, I was a pretty good student. School came rather easily to me, so I excelled in all my classes, but I also enjoyed things like being on the high school yearbook committee. But really, I was already to get out of Winston, Oregon. I already had traveled a lot. Our family traveled quite a bit back and forth to Denmark over the years as we were growing up. So Mark and I, my brother Mark, we were already pretty worldly. In fact, when I was in second grade and my brother was in fifth grade, we spent a year in Denmark. We lived there to try it out. My mother especially wanted to go back and be with her family. So we went back and we found a house. There was kind of a house swap that happened, or another Danish couple that went on a sabbatical somewhere. So we got to use their house for a year. That was amazing. That really gave me the roots of connected me with my Danish roots. Got to meet all my cousins, which we have 13 first cousins. My mother's side of the family was 5 sisters in the family. So we learned to speak Danish. We learned to eat Danish, to cook Danish, to live Danish. And it was a big influence on my life.
What does that mean to live Danish?
Yeah, there is a great book. I think it's The Year of Living Danishly or something like that. It's the philosophy and a lifestyle of enjoying yourself and being in the moment, I think, partially is what I see in it. Enjoying the company of others. The Danes are very social, and they sing a lot, and they do this exercising a lot, the gymnastic. So, of course, it's a socialist country, so being social, but in a different way, being, with each other in community and developing a sense of community. It's kind of what I think of when I think of being Danish. Okay. But also this sense of hygge. Hygge is a word that's been used a lot lately, but it is coziness, setting yourself up for surrounding yourself with things that make you feel good and not being ashamed to do that, to feel good in your life and to go after things that give you a sense of satisfaction. So, but at the same time, there's also jentelo, which means you can have all that and all the nice stuff and have a good life, but you have to be humble about it. There's a feeling of humility that it's not good to boast or brag. So hopefully I've learned to live that a little bit too, to live my life as I want to, but to not make too big of a deal out of it, because that would be boasting in a Danish lifestyle.
And then, so you got out of your community, you went away to college?
Well, the way I got out was through another big influence in my life. They were my parents, of course, first. And then I found a group called Up With People. And it's an international educational organization for young people, a leadership program. And Up With People came through Oregon in the 70s, and they traveled all over the world. And they came through my small town and performed. And I saw this incredible international show with singing and dancing, 100 young people on stage from all over the world. So young people from 30 different countries come together and travel in this performing group and learn how to get along with each other, and kind of a little microcosm of life, traveling around, putting on a show, which, you know, was right up my alley. Dancing, jumping, singing. I wasn't really trained as a dancer yet. I had some ballet when I was a kid, like 2 years of ballet classes with some old ballet teacher that, you know, would smack you with something on your hands if you're wrong. But so I didn't really like ballet, but I was a dancer and a gymnast and a cheerleader. And I liked moving for sure. And I was in swing choir. I was an accompanist. I learned piano. So I kind of had a bunch of talents that I was sort of okay at. And Up With People was a perfect entity for me, because it was just like what my parents did. It was like Danish gymnastics, traveling around the world, seeing the world and experiencing life by living with host families. So everywhere we went, we would live in a host family. So you would show up to a city, and the host family would have a sign with some little code on it, and you had a code word, and you would go and meet them, and you'd go to their house and eat their food and speak their language and understand what they did. And in that first year, I think I stayed with almost 100 host families in about 11 months. So that's a lot. We were traveling 2 days in the city. We'd do a show, and then we'd pack up and go to the next city. So Up With People really made a huge impact in my life. It taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about being resourceful. Up With People's leadership training program is based on 3 unique lines. One is this idea of host families, international exchange, intercultural exchange. So you're traveling around the world with people from around the world, staying in people's homes, and learning about each other. The second thing is performance. So you learn by putting on a show, by singing, dancing, being on stage, learning confidence, all the things that come along with performance and the musical arts, which I had already had a background in that, but I certainly embraced it. And the third area of Up With People that's really important is community service. So in each of these cities we'd perform a show, but we'd also do community service of some sort. And that would be arranged by our leaders of the cast. And then our sponsors would say, hey, you know, in our community, we really have an issue with racism, let's say. I remember being in Alabama and Missouri with the cast, and we would go in and have discussions in high schools and in junior highs with people about racism and about the differences and the similarities. And we would use our own experience, having traveled around the world with these people, which in my cast that first year I had 60 people from 20 different countries. And, you know, we had Black, brown, white, Asian, everybody was there. And we didn't think much of it. We would go into a city in, say, Alabama. I remember distinctly one episode in 1977, the production manager, I think it was the production manager, Trey Williams, was an African-American man. And he and I were dance partners. He was very talented. So we were, you know, same size, and we danced, and we were best friends. And we were walking down a street together. Maybe it was Birmingham, Alabama, in 1977. You know, a little blonde girl and this African-American guy. And I think we might have been holding hands. I mean, we were just really close to each other and laughing. And suddenly I just felt looks at me. I felt something on the back of my neck. I felt, and he did too. And we were getting some looks from some people that didn't make us feel comfortable. And so that was kind of the first time in my life that I realized, wow, not everybody is the same. Not everybody does think the same. And I was naive, I guess, but it certainly made an impression on me. So I traveled Up With People for a year. as a student, then I left Up With People and went to University of Oregon, sorry. But in that time, right as I was leaving Up With People, another big thing happened in our lives, and that was that my brother Mark had an injury. He dove into a river and unfortunately hit a branch and broke his neck at the cervical 5 and 6 level and became a complete quadriplegic instantly. And that was happening just as I was leaving Up With People and coming home and in the summer. He had just graduated from college. So of course that was a huge shock and a huge change for everything in our lives. And Mark went to his rehabilitation, and that was 8 months at that time in Craig Hospital in Denver. And I was coming off of Up With People, so I was at home. And when he came back home, our family basically decided, I had been thinking of where I was going to go to college, and I said I would love to go to the University of Oregon, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but Mark said I would be happy to live in Eugene, and this was about an hour from our house. So our parents purchased a home, and Mark and I lived there together, and I became his caregiver for the 3 years that I went to the University of Oregon. So I was a double major in dance and recreation and park management, and I was a full-time caregiver for my brother. Well, not full-time, I mean, getting him in and out of bed and helping with showers, but I would do that in the morning. I'd go to school. I took dance classes all day, recreation classes, and had to petition, back to the overachiever in me, I had to petition to take more credits than they would allow, because I just wanted so much, I just wanted to accomplish this, and I just somehow just felt like, oh, give me more. So I completed my double major in 3 years, and made the dean's list and got honors. So I guess I'm kind of proud of that.
How
Well,
old, how old was Mark when he had his accident?
he was 21 and I was 18.
18. So how did given your Danish background, and I don't know if this really impacts things, but how did your parents kind of handle, this accident to their son, who probably was bound to do many, many different things in his life? How did they react?
Well, I'm remembering, trying to think back, and obviously there was shock and pain and sorrow at the fact that he was no longer going to be able to move and run and jump and do the things. He was also very athletic and played basketball all through high school and ran cross country. I sort of followed, in his footsteps. But he was also a very smart guy who had studied political science and was thinking about maybe, I think, going on to law school is what he was considering at the time. So that this is a life-changing event. Of course, it was a shock, but I think what I remember is just that pretty quickly, the family was, okay, let's get back into exercise. Let's go. And just up here, I happen to have a picture of Mark in his wheelchair tennis outfit. I think he's just playing in his day chair. Back then, there were no sports chairs. So he quickly adapted and started playing sports right away again. And our whole family had played tennis before as a family. So Mark jumped back into that and became, I think, one of the early wheelchair tennis players, probably. He played along with some of the best in the sport right now, Dave Wagner, who later, right now, is one of the top Paralympic quadriplegics, right? Mark played with him as in a doubles format for many tournaments. And Mark also started playing wheelchair rugby in the early days of wheelchair rugby, when it was just forming as a sport. And Eugene, actually, that's probably why we moved to Eugene, because Eugene had a few guys who wanted to play wheelchair rugby. And so Mark jumped into that. And so fairly quickly, it was kind of business as usual. Let's get back into sports and moving and let's go. And my parents didn't pity him or let him, neither did I, be too slovenly or lazy. I mean, it was sort of like, let's go. Because I guess that's maybe that idea of just accepting where you are in the moment. Again, is sort of what it was all about for us. So Mark adapted, pretty quickly. And of course, I'm sure he would say that there were down times, that everyone who goes through that has depression. But I think the fact that our parents were so positive and supportive and active, same with me. I was his little sister, and he was fine with me being his caregiver, doing some of those most intimate things that one has to do in the beginning, including bowel and bladder issues and all of that. And we just did it. And Mark was really a trailblazer, maybe like my mom and dad, who were trailblazers. Mom was the first jogger. Mark was one of the first wheelchair tennis and rugby players. That was pretty cool. And, that impacted me a lot later in my life when I have come back to adaptive sports.
We'll talk more about, how that did impact you. You're 18 years old. Your brothers just had this major accident. How did it change your life?
Well, I didn't really turn my life upside down for my brother. I was able to juggle, living with him and helping him, but he also had some other caregivers who came in and out of the house. So it wasn't like I was, stuck doing this job that I didn't want to do. I wanted to help him and wanted to get him back to health and wellness while I was doing all of these things. Remember, I was doing a double major and dancing all day in the dance classes and doing the recreation classes. And by the way, I was a bodybuilder at the time too. I was doing bodybuilding, which was, I don't know why, but I was at a gym. That's right. I worked out a lot at the gym, and some guy came by me and said, "Wow, you're really buff." I said, well, thanks. Because I was dancing. I had no body fat. I was just in very good condition at the time. And I was exercising too. And I've always felt that upper body strength was really important. So I was doing weightlifting and things, not with a plan to be a bodybuilder. But this guy was actually a bodybuilder at the time. And he saw me working out at this gym. And he said, I want to enter the Mr. Oregon competition. And they have a mixed partner competition, the first time ever. This was in 1980, I think. I said, okay, that's kind of interesting. So he convinced me to compete with him in bodybuilding, and we won. I think maybe there's only one other pair competing, but I think we won. So anyway, I was doing everything that I wanted to do. There wasn't any moment when Mark's situation held me back. Maybe more than anything, I was really living and trying to be very active, and I guess hoping that in some ways, Mark would see that and continue to be active. And he did. He was playing wheelchair rugby and tennis and traveling a lot to tournaments, and quickly became able to be on his own, really, after a couple of years of getting strength back. He was really independent, so he didn't really need a caregiver. But we lived together anyway in that house and shared the house, and those were fun years. And then after I graduated with my double major, and I saw Mark was perfectly fine, I said, okay, I'm heading out. And Up With People called me back and said, hey, we've got a position, and we have a dance captain position, and we need you in a week in Spain. Are you interested? I said, of course I'm interested. So I took off and joined Up With People and started my career with Up With People. That was in 1981. And joined a cast in Barcelona, España, and traveled around Europe for the first 3 months. And then I started being moved from cast to cast as a troubleshooter and staying in the dance department. And now I had a background in dance, so I could actually teach. And I started choreographing and putting together. My first piece of choreography was for Up With People, and it was a Danish gymnastics number, because we always would put these international numbers in the show. And so I did a little gymnastics routine. I think it was to some American music. It was really cheesy, but it was a big hit. And when we traveled in Denmark, I was on the road with the cast and went back to Denmark, and was the only person in the cast who could speak Danish, and had to do the MCs of the show. And, I was sent out on promotion ahead of the cast and got to just do a lot of very cool things, back to my Danish roots again. Had a little moment on Danish national television where I sang a Danish solo, even though I wasn't much of a singer, but I got to sing a Danish song on Danish national television.
And how many years then were you with Up With People?
Yeah, I was with them from 81. I had a brief break. I left in 83 for for about 6 to 8 months because my mother was dying of cancer. So, I was in Up With People from 81 to 83, and then my mother had ovarian cancer, and she had been getting treatment while I was on the road, and things seemed to be going well, but then she had a relapse. And so I left Up With People to go home and to be with my mom. And that was good. That was really important to do that. I got to go back to the old homestead house in Winston. My mom, when she went into remission, decided that was it. No more chemo, no more nothing. She just wanted to, to live her life out as it was. So I had to spend some last days with her, and that was pretty important. And after she passed, I spent a little time going back to Denmark and taught jazz dancing on Strøget, the famous street in Copenhagen, at a dance studio run by an American guy, a black guy who had, I think, evaded the draft and moved to Denmark so he could evade the Vietnam draft. And he was a dancer, and he had this great dance studio. And he realized I was an American who could speak Danish and do, American style of dancing, which was exactly what the Danes wanted. So I taught jazz dance and lived in Copenhagen for about 6 months. And then I got through that. I also did it to kind of get back to my roots with my mom. And I said, I really think Up With People's the place for me. So then I went back in 1985. They had an opening for the assistant choreographer. And I worked from 1985 to 1991, I think, as the assistant choreographer for Up With People. Great experience. Very formative years for me. In my early time with Up With People, I was traveling on the road in my early 20s. Getting to do some really cool stuff. That's what's unique about Up With People. They throw you out there and say, you can do this. Come on, you can do it. And you're saying, no, I couldn't. Yes, you're doing it. See, you can do it. And just this constant kind of positive promotion of your abilities rubs off. Not to everybody, but to most of us who had that experience, it was really special. At age 21, you're in charge of a cast doing performances for the King of Spain and for the Queen of Belgium, and getting to meet them. And then in the 80s, I was able to do a Super Bowl halftime in 1986. Up With People, it has the record for doing Super Bowl halftimes. They did 4 halftimes in the early years, and kind of started that whole thing of doing shows and that later became what it is today, which is over the top. But Up With People was the first real big kind of show company to do Super Bowl halftime. So in 86, I was in New Orleans and got to be part of the production team that put on the halftime of the Super Bowl.
Wow, that is incredible, Mia.
It was cool. At the time, I didn't think, well, I guess we thought it was incredible, but it's just, you just did it, and nobody questioned it, that you're 21 or 22 or, young person doing these things. It was pretty cool.
So during this time, you're traveling quite a bit. Your mom has passed. So how about your dad and Mark? I mean,
Well, they were still back in, Mark was living his life in Eugene. He stayed in Eugene, and when I vacated, he rented out the room and found some good roommates. In the beginning, it was kind of live-in, bit of a caregiver thing, because he still needed a little bit of help with some stuff. And of course, it was helpful to have someone who could cut the grass and pick up stuff or do whatever. But Mark quickly became independent, and he really built his life there in Eugene. Didn't go on to law school. His life had changed and things were different, but he definitely got into the whole idea too of adaptive sports. He became very active in the Oregon Adaptive Sports Associations, which I think today is called Adaptive Sports Northwest. He, was a promoter and quickly mentored other young people who were having injuries and getting them involved. So I would travel around the world with Up With People, but I'd go home for Christmas to be with my dad and my brother. And I would make all the Danish dishes that my mother had taught me how to do. So I was kind of keeping the traditions going. And my dad was still living down in Roseburg. He had sold a big house and moved into a smaller condo in Roseburg. My dad was still active in, he was investing in properties and I remember he had bought a hazelnut farm that was close to the YMCA. It was a piece of property right in the middle of town. It was hazelnuts. And we would always go down there, pick these fresh hazelnuts. Have you ever had a fresh hazelnut? They're watery and they're crisp. Oh, it was delicious. We'd go just, stuff them. And then we'd go play tennis. And Mark would come down in his tennis chair and everybody who knew us, and knew and missed Mom, of course. But we would play, tennis with the old gang. And whenever I was home, I would always go visit Roseburg a little bit to be with my dad. And that was great. And, in the 80s there, while I was really busy with Up With People, we didn't do a lot of trips together. That ended up coming later in the 90s after I left Up With People. So they were having their lives and staying in close contact. And my father, of course, helping my brother as needed, remodeling his house, making all kinds of innovations. My dad, remember, was a plumbing contractor and a tinsmith. And he remodeled the house to be, incredibly accessible. He basically redid Mark's van. Mark had a 78 Dodge van that they purchased. And my father, made the grooves and put in all the sheet metal work to make it accessible. So I was always around, I knew that my dad was pretty special with that. And, but I wasn't paying much attention to it at the time.
What year did your dad pass away?
Well, he passed in 94. So I remember a really great time that we had together was in 1992. My father died he had a stroke and then he died later, about 6-7 months later. But in 92, I had left Up With People and I was just kind of looking for stuff to do. And I was being entrepreneurial and I was getting into my years as a choreographer and establishing my, what did I want to be, and started Mia Hansen Entertainment at the time to freelance as a choreographer and as a dance teacher. So I was teaching at a couple of studios and a friend of ours, of the family back in Denmark, Stig Tornson, dear friend, his father and my father were best friends. And so Mark and I and Stig knew each other growing up. Stig is an entrepreneur, a museum exhibitor, a Danish TV producer, a writer, author, a translator of books. And he is also an expert in American Indians because he lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico for many years. And this became his life. He just studied Native Americans and taught some classes in Native Americans in Albuquerque, at the University of New Mexico. So Danish guy becoming an expert in Native Americans, teaching in, the Four Corners area. So he knew his stuff, right? So in 92, Stig was asked to work with the Roskilde Festival. That's a major rock and roll festival in Roskilde, Denmark. And 92, of course, 1992 was a famous 500-year anniversary of Columbus discovering America. And in true Danish fashion, instead of celebrating Columbus, who was kind of this white guy who came and more or less decimated the Native American tribes by discovering them, they decided to celebrate the Native Americans, the people who were there first. And so Stig said, got this phone call. Yeah, Stig, I've been contracted to create the American Indian Pavilion at the Roskilde Festival. And it's going to be this giant pavilion and we're going to have buffalo burgers, or I'm going to import bison meat and I need entertainment. And I want this to be big. So can you help me? We're going to recruit 100 Native Americans to come over and sing and dance and do their native, music and dance for 4 days at the Roskilde Festival. I said, yeah, that's great. So, I was the American talent scout basically for this project to get tribal performers, individual artists. So it was music and singing, dancing, drumming and dancing, and visual art. So sculptor, painters. Uh, we had a sculptor from the Tlingit tribe up in northwest Washington, southern British Columbia, who was incredible, who carved totem poles and, you know, so I got to travel again all over America. And I remember driving up to Navajo country, past Window Rock up to Chinle, Arizona, to interview the, I forget what they were called, the sisters, the Navajo sisters. It was an older group of Navajo singers. And I had to go out and recruit people and convince them to come with us, to all expenses paid, to Denmark for 4 days at a rock festival to do their traditional Navajo singing. So I was using all those skills I had learned in Up With People, you know, publicity and cultural exchange, and it was just great. And it was really a wonderful project. And we ended up close to 100 entertainers and performers and artists that flew from all over the States, you know, I remember we all kind of arrived in Heathrow together, and I was the cast manager, whatever, shepherding them all, and we flew to Copenhagen and got everyone on a bus and went to this rock festival, which is out in the middle of a beautiful farmland in outside of Roskilde. And it's a heavy duty rock and roll festival. I can't remember who was I can't remember the names. I have to look it up now. I wasn't too into rock and roll, obviously, but these were big names, you know, that were performing in Roskilde. Okay, I got to look it up now.
Okay.
Line up, because I remember we came on this bus, or two buses, with all of these Native American performers, and it was a mile away from the rock and roll venue. You could hear this pulsating music, and it just blew your hair backwards. Literally, it was okay. Pearl Jam, Nirvana,
Wow.
John Trudell, you know. I mean, so I think Pearl Jam was on the main stage when we drove up with everybody, and the Navajo elders were just quiet and sort of in shock, and the young Apache guys who I had recruited, who were a crown dance group, leapt out of the bus, took off, and they saw these topless Danish girls sunbathing, and we didn't see some of them for the next 4 days. Unfortunately, we had to find them. So it was a real mixture of the native people that we had, some very traditional and some that just saw this as like, holy cow. It was really incredible. And they all performed like they were supposed to, and what they, you know, they were all paid well, and they were full expenses, and everyone stayed at this Danish folk high school, and you know, it was really pretty cool. But intercultural exchange, that was really the moment where I realized I can do this. I'm pretty good at pulling together large groups of different kinds of people and getting them someplace, which is what Up With People taught us how to do, how to get things done fairly quickly with groups of people from very different backgrounds.
So with this business, what were some of the other kind of things that you did? Entertainment?
Yeah. Well, after that, then I decided I'm going to really go into this and start an entertainment agency. This was my first experience of booking entertainment. So I started Mia Hansen Entertainment, but then I also met my soon-to-be business partner, Daryl, who I was back in Tucson. Now I decided to move to Tucson and stay here. Well, I stayed here when Up With People left Tucson, actually. And I was doing, all these little gigs here and there. Some other Up With People we put together some shows, and we started doing work for the corporate market here in Tucson. And this guy, Daryl, had the best band in town called Twilight. And they were a cover band that played all the corporate gigs. You know, they could do everything. They could do country western, rock and roll, oldies. So they were the band that got the most work in town. And I had this group of dancers who was trying to kind of come up with a format that we could get work doing sort of mini musical shows. And Daryl and I met, and we said, hey, let's do this. Let's come up with these live shows. And we sort of created a little formula. And our first big show was called the Cantina Show. And it was a Wild West review the Twilight Band was the country band. And I would hire dancers. I would go down to the U of A, which I knew very well from Up With People. And I would sit in and watch the dance classes. I actually went to the U of A in 92 for 2 years as a graduate student. I thought I would get my graduate degree. I thought I might go on to teach in graduate school. That stopped. I did 1 year of that, year and a half, and realized I was starting my production company and already making more money doing production than I would ever have made being an assistant professor at a university and having way more fun. So, teaching a little bit at the U of A, and then I would look through the classes and I would see people, oh, you come over here, and these young girls would come over and I'd say, you look like you're a great dancer. Are you interested in a gig? And they'd be like, what do you mean? Is this topless dancing? I'm like, no. This is legitimate musical theater. And we created these shows, and you're going to learn this show, and it's a 30-minute review, and it's going to be can and high energy, Western music dancing and some Mexican folk dance tossed in there. And we put together these shows. The Cantina Show, I think the first year we sold like 100 of them. We did 100 shows in 300 days. So we were doing them like this at for corporate events. This was the heyday of corporations having a lot of money to spend on their employees. Wow, you're the best salesman of the Ford Motor Company. We're going to send 1,000 of you to Tucson to have a big party. And they would do theme parties, and we had it down pat. We had a Wild West party with a band. So we would sell a package, 4 hours of musical entertainment, a band, girls to meet and greet you. Hey there, partner, how you doing? In can costumes, and cowboys, and we'd have these Wild West games that we put together, and had another guy in town who put together these sort of gun shooting fake games and roping cows and just really stupid stuff that people ate up, that the corporate people just loved because they could let their hair down and have fun. And then there would be the band would play dinner music, and then we would do the live show out in most of them were outdoors, a lot of them inside ballrooms, but we have these venues outside that the cactus and the sun going down. It was just really cool. And you'd see this kind of Wild West review as if you were in 1882 or something. And then it was old fashioned, and then I made it into a contemporary thing by we'd go from the old days, and then we did a little Mexican section. What did we do? We did tequila, we did a little salsa dancing to that. And then we went into a modern contemporary Western, sort of think of Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders, but not quite as slutty. But spandex and cowboy hats and doing this really energetic, cowboy number. And that was the show. And then we would say, okay, now it's your turn. And we'd get them all up and teach them country swing and line dancing. So it was interactive, and it was fun. And this was, again, all my Up With People training of getting people engaged and bringing them out. And, it was very wholesome entertainment there, but, it was just fun. It was reliable, and we really made our living because we showed up on time. And we also booked then other kinds of entertainment, mariachis, Native American drummers. If you wanted someone to do sand painting, we had all my friends who I had booked from the 1992 Roskilde thing, we had all of these things that we could offer. If you needed a jazz trio or a solo guitarist. So by day, we were on the telephones, Daryl and I. This was now a partnership. We formed Twilight Productions. And that really started in 92. And we were together for about 9 years, and until about 2000. And had a great time. Besides the Western show, then we started branching out. We did a hot salsa night show, which was all Latin, jazz, and salsa, and a 10-piece salsa band. And then same kind of formula, music before dinner, dinner music, a big show, and then teach people how to dance or do something interactive.
So this is throughout the United States then?
No, this is just in Tucson, Phoenix, primarily Tucson, Phoenix, and Palm Springs. We had booking agents of other guys who heard about our show, and we were one of the few entities that was doing this kind of quick-paced live musical theater. There were theater groups in town, but they were stuck in being in the theater, and we have to be in the theater, and we just can't move. We would do it anywhere. I mean, I remember setting up. By day we would book the shows, And then about 3 o'clock, I would pack up the van. We had this roll-up door and an office on one side and the warehouse in the back. We had all the costumes, all the sound equipment. I would pack up the van with whatever the costumes were for the night, you know, the Cantina Show. I had a van that had racks in it that everything was hanging in there. And we would drive out to this place called Tanca Verde Guest Ranch, which is at the end of Speedway here in Tucson. It's really a dude ranch. And they had this beautiful camp out area down below by the creek and campfires. And our dressing room was underneath a mesquite tree, kind of hidden in the back. And one night, one of the girls screamed because a couple of javelinas came running through the camp and, you know, probably had a bra on their nose or something like that. Just great stuff, right? We're out in the middle of the desert doing Wild West shows. It was a lot of fun. And we made a lot of money too for ourselves. So we were the actors and the performers. My business partner, Daryl, was the guitar player in the band. I performed in the shows. And so our performers were getting, you know, $100, $120 a night for doing a couple hours of work. That was really great. They were, you know, students and going to school, or my old Up With People friends who, you know, I knew could do this well. So it was kind of a nice little business for a while. And Daryl and I would make some extra money. We would, you know, sell the show for a little bit more. So, you know, we made money and had some good years, and but we worked very hard. By the end of this, I was getting pretty tired, because in the beginning it was fun, but it was a slog. Now you know, it was like, oh, okay, you know, we had to go out and do it every night, and we started to get a little tired of that. So I started to try to find people to take over my role, and we did. And then eventually I decided to leave Twilight, and we had an amicable parting of ways, because I just I had done it enough, and I was kind of tired of that.
And then how did you start getting into, you know, more of the adaptive sports and really working with people with disabilities?
Yeah, well, I took you through the 90s. I know, my life is exciting, right? Now in the early 2000s, we haven't quite gotten to adaptive sports again yet, because I was still doing Mia Hansen Entertainment, and I got into festival production, and I started producing, thinking I want to do different things. So I got involved with something called the Cultural Exchange Council of Tucson, and they were putting on this big festival here called Tucson Meet Yourself, which is a multicultural big festival. It's happened now for 48 years in Tucson. And oh, wait a minute, before we leave the Wild West review, there I am doing the can-can. So that's what got my hip, that right there, that kick is where I had to get my hip replacement. No, that happened later, but festival and event production was great. And so I was working here and there, you know, just, and along with all of this, I was also fortunate that my father had passed away now in 94. And when he died, he left Mark and I, you know, a sizable inheritance, which, you know, we left a bit more of it to Mark. And he said, Mia, you're always going to be able to work, and I have no doubt you're going to figure things out. But, you know, Mark's situation is maybe a little, you know, tougher to deal with. So we both got, you know, some stocks and bonds. And of course, Mark being very smart, invested very well. And me being a little stupid, I bought a Mazda RX-7 with my first $15,000. But I saved money and found a stockbroker and started really learning about that. So that was really, you know, this education that they gave us, and the idea of being frugal and being careful about your money if you have it, you know, hold on to it. That those are also some Danish qualities, I think, or maybe just hardworking qualities of parents. But you know, Dad always taught us to think about the future, and then if we were fortunate, when, you know, as we were, if we had extra, to give back to the community. So that stuck with me too, because Dad was always very generous, and, you know, always, you know, we lived a good lifestyle, but there was never any greediness to it. If we had extra, we shared and gave it away. So that stuck with me too. So in the 2000s, I got involved in event production, and I started working with Cultural Exchange Council, And that was a small little nonprofit that was running Tucson Meet Yourself, but it was about to fail. They were about to close because they didn't have any money. They had this great event that everybody loved, and everybody was coming, and it was all the cultural groups of Tucson, the Danish club and the To'ona Odham tribal elders would come and make fry bread, and the Vietnamese club, all like 30 or 40 different ethnic groups that would come out because Tucson's this crossroads. Everybody would make their food and sell it at these food booths. And then there was 2 stages, maybe only one in the beginning, where everyone would perform their cultural stuff, right? It was right up my alley from Up With People. And then there were folk arts and crafts. There was another area where people were making their handworks and all these folk arts and traditions. So I really embraced this, and it was like Up With People, but come back to Tucson. So I became the first. I saw that they were failing. I said, come on, let's do something. I joined the board. We turned it around, and I said, we've got to make this into a bigger thing or it's going to fail. So formed a new board, formed a new nonprofit, called it Tucson Meet Yourself. We're able to get sponsors. We're able to get the community to get behind the idea of funding this thing that everybody loved, but nobody knew how to make it go around. We knew we needed it, but it was like, it was always free. There was no admission, so there was no income there. And they kind of resisted the idea of having sponsors because that would dirty it up. And I said, no, it won't. It'll give more people an opportunity to be a part of something. And so that kind of is, I'm saying that because that's coming to where, getting into adaptive sports after some years of doing all that, and years of doing the kicking and the can-can. At the time I was dancing with a Russian folk dance group for fun here in town to keep myself active. I was dancing with a couple of different folk dance groups, and I went one year, it must have been 2007 or something like that. I went down in a deep Russian Pryatska, or whatever it's called, the Russian kick, and something went in my hip area, and I thought, man, I must have pulled my groin muscle or something, but it didn't go away, and didn't go away, and it became worse, and it turned out that was a torn cartilage in my hip, and that was my career ending. Right at that moment, I said, okay, am I going to keep dancing and doing all this stuff, or is it time to put my dancing shoes away for a while? And I did. There's a lot of stuff in between we don't have to get into, but I decided that I had done enough performance and that it was okay to be gone. But I also felt somewhat restricted. Now suddenly I couldn't do what I had always been able to do. I couldn't jump and run, and I was hurting, and I had torn this cartilage, and I ended up having a surgery, and that surgery helped for a while. It was sort of a, shaving down the cartilage, but that I was still really in pain, and I couldn't really move. And I started to get a little bit of a feeling of what it's like to have somewhat of a disability. For me, that was a disabling condition, to not be able to do everything I always had wanted to do. Nothing like what my brother experienced, but now the time after my father died, my brother Mark started coming to Tucson in the winter times. And so he was in the picture too, and he was coming down here, and he had been spending some weeks with us at our house at the time. And I said to him one time, I said, why don't you just buy a place down here so you can have a winter home? And he did. He bought a home not very far away from me, which is a lovely home, which you've been to, Mike. And I helped him with that, and we helped buy it and helped renovate it, and started getting into the whole idea of renovating things and making it wheelchair accessible. And then he started playing wheelchair rugby here at the U of A. And I started getting to know the U of A people, University of Arizona. And so after I decided that I'd had enough of production and showbiz, and I was fortunate to be able to change, things in the way I worked for a while for Ballet Tucson. I was a stage manager, a production manager. I was on the board of several nonprofit organizations here in town. So I'd had experience with nonprofit management, mostly in the arts and culture. But I started thinking, maybe there's something else that I should still do. Is there one more career, one more thing? And then about that time, I left all my festival event production and started working with refugees in our community, and especially refugees with disabilities. I was volunteering to kind of share my cultural knowledge about the world. and met some very interesting and unique young refugees, including Rahana, who's a Somali refugee that's about 6 years ago, who has disability. And I said, what can I do to get her engaged? And it came to me, adaptive sports, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, and got me back into adaptive sports because I had this one particular gal, Rahana, who I knew had potential to be an athlete because she's 19, but she'd been in a refugee camp for half of her life, so had never really sat in a wheelchair. And we introduced her to the U of A, and I had known about Pete Hughes at the time a little bit because my brother knew about him. And I met Pete and I said, I've got this young girl who I think might be interested in basketball, and threw her in a sports chair, and boom, she took off. And Pete saw her long arms and her athleticism and said, I want her on the team. So that got me really about 6 years ago heavily into adaptive sports here in town. And I started volunteering with the U of A and helping Pete Hughes with his women's team, as I was the mom, the team mom and the manager. And I went touring with them when they went out on the road for the first 2 years that Rahana was on the team. And that also opened my eyes to what was going on in the community. The U of A was fabulous and is fabulous, has a very strong adaptive sports program, but I saw that there were a lot of community members who weren't really able to participate because they weren't at the elite level that the U of A was at and still is at. The U of A prides himself on being at the elite level and has produced many Paralympians. But what about my brother, who is now in his 60s and still wanted to play tennis? And, what about me, who I kind of couldn't run and jump anymore because of my hip problems? And I kind of wanted to play basketball. So I jumped in a chair and found out that I loved it. And I was still very good and I could compete as a wheelchair basketball player. And I really couldn't run and jump at the time because my hip was so eaten up. This was before I had my hip replacement, that I just was limping around. So I kind of got into it myself. And I thought, I have a recreation degree back from my double major in recreation. And I focused on therapeutic recreation and on health club stuff. And so I got a recreation degree. I know how to do this. I know how to lead. I know how to pull things together. So I found the Lobos, the Tucson Lobos, local wheelchair basketball group. And at the time they were suffering. And suffering meaning they didn't have anybody to raise money. They didn't know how to do it. The particular collection of people were saying, yeah, let's just give up. And I said, no, let's not give up. This is really fun. And if that's all you need is just somebody to organize, I can do that. Kind of putting my finger in the dike again, as I tend to do when there's an issue and people are like, oh, we can't do that. Hey, yes, we can. Let's go. You can do it. You can do it. Kind of the up with people training of, you can do it. You're doing it. See, okay, we're doing it. Yay. And by golly, people with some encouragement and some positive coaching and motivation and support tend to be able, I think, to do way more than we ever thought we could do in the first place. So it was kind of an easy transition to figure out, wow, let's get into adaptive sports. And then somewhere, Mike, you came along and you were involved in the U of A as well. And I think you had the same knowledge and idea that Tucson needed something more than just the U of A. And so, together, thank you for helping us form Southern Arizona Adaptive Sports, which we did in May of 2017. And we're now 3 years into it. And you were part of the founding board, and we discovered that there were a lot of people in this community that wanted to keep going and have sports and recreation, but didn't have the money for the equipment, the facilities to do it in, the coaching to keep it going, and the management to organize and to raise all the money. So that's what we've been doing now for 3 years, and it's going pretty well.
But Mia, you've shown me that you have this incredible connection with the athletes. So can you talk a little bit more about Rihanna? Because it's almost as if she, and maybe she is, like your adopted daughter.
Here she is. Yeah, well, when she first came to Tucson, I don't have any children, and I never really wanted to have children. I got my need to be with kids out while I was doing Up with People, dealing with young adults and teaching ballet. So I never really had planned to have kids anyway. And my partner for life, Paul, also was the same. So we were fine with that. But when I saw Rahana, she was the first refugee that I had really decided I was ready to do something that would go back to helping people individually. Up with people, training is really about the confidence in yourself, and that you can change the world one person at a time. A lot of Up With People songs are about that. One of them is called One to One. We change the world by giving to another. And so that idea of, community service and being with somebody, I just remember my years in Up With People, that it was about one-on-one connections, and that, if you stop and take the time to really help somebody, a person, it is life-changing for you and that person. And the trickle-down effect can be such that, that's how big ideas are formed. But you can't start big. You have to start one-to-one. And so this, my years of doing production and shows and it was fast-paced, and there was a lot of people coming and going, and we were making money. And then I did the festival and event, and there was 100,000 people at a festival and big production, but I was kind of out of the one-to-one thing. I was big and doing fast-paced stuff, and I needed to get back to the one-to-one connection. So with Rahana, I really had a big challenge in that here was a young woman who didn't speak English and was illiterate in her own language and no family. And so I kind of saw my moment to get back into it and give it a try. So I really did spend the first, 6 months of time with Rahana learning what it was like, again, to be very focused on one person and trying to help them, move their life forward. And that just reminded me, of the importance of that. Because it is one-to-one. I mean, your work too, you've done with nonprofit work, helping an individual to learn something is so rewarding, and if we can't pass on our good fortune, what's the point? I've been fortunate in my life. I've been lucky. I was, born in the right gene pool, I guess, right? I mean, my looks, okay. No, but I mean, also my the freedom to have individual wealth, to have opportunity, to have an education. And when you meet someone who hasn't had that opportunity, it really sets you back a little bit. So that connection was really important to me. And that reminded me of that, how much I love teaching. And, I've always been a teacher, whether it was dance or cultural exchange or whatever. And also, there's a lot of logistics involved too. There's a lot of things I learned by working with refugees that I didn't know about in my own country, like welfare system, social security, being a person with a disability. I always knew my brother's situation, but I didn't know a lot of other people's situations of what it was like to really live as a person with a disability, and then not to have an education. You really you really have some barriers that you got to overcome. So I learned a lot in these last 5 years about our social welfare system, for better or worse, our democracy. I consider myself a liberal Democrat, but I don't know. I think a lot of the liberal democratic programs don't necessarily teach people self-reliance as much as they should. There's when you really give the handout to people, sometimes it is hard to get back into relying on yourself. So I kind of mix my beliefs with this ingrained, training to rely on yourself. If you're going to get things done, like my dad would say, if you want to learn how to drive a car, then you need to know how to change the oil and change a tire. And here you go. Here's a tire. And I had to learn how to change a tire before my dad would let me learn to drive a car, which was great. Thank goodness, because now I can change a tire, right? And if I'm stuck somewhere, I can do things for myself. And that's a really important, I think, point to try to teach others. So it kept going.
Yeah, sorry. So you continue to help people, individually. I know last year you were in Indonesia with Wheelchair Athletes Worldwide, and you met a young man named Yusuf.
Yeah. Well, Yusuf is an example, I mean, here in Tucson, other refugees and just people, not just refugees, but other people that you meet who have a compelling need. And when I was in Indonesia with Wheelchair Athletes Worldwide, that wasn't an unusual trip for me. That was, I've traveled the world, and it was community service, it was world travel, it was cultural exchange. So it was kind of right up my alley. And when Pete Hughes asked me to go, I said, sure, I'll go, because I had never been to Indonesia. And I pretty much filled the role for them of being a tag along, but, schlepping the equipment and then doing what I do, which is kind of being on the outskirts to see who's being left out, which is an important thing to remember. You can see the success in an athletic team of the top starters and everybody else, but there's always, unfortunately, there seems to be people who don't quite make it, or left out, or the sixth person on the bench, or whatever. So I was kind of had my radar open. I met Yusuf, who is a very nice man, a massage therapist by training, but who was a horrible wheelchair basketball player. He had no natural talent, no physical facility, really. And in these 4 days of trying to, everybody was in 30 people, and they were all different disabilities. And, Yusuf just couldn't quite learn how to push a wheelchair, and couldn't quite catch the ball. And, he was having fun. He was laughing, but he couldn't keep up with everybody at the drill. So I got him on the side, and it was my job to kind of, take him through the drills slowly, and got to know him. And he was one of the better English speakers. And, we befriended each other, and we've kept in touch since then. And of course, living as a person with a disability in any place other than America, Canada, maybe some of the Scandinavian and European countries is very challenging. We think it's challenging here, but in some ways, the Indonesian culture and society does people a favor by not giving a handout. There is no social welfare system. There is no, if you're disabled, here we're going to give you, money to live, because you can't work. Everyone has to work. They got to figure it out. But along with that, the educational system and the inequities there are that if you are a person with a disability and you look different, and you look a little weird, or you're missing an arm or a leg, or you're blind, we'll take care of you, but you're never going to amount to much. So why bother? And that, is the attitude that I saw Rahana come from, and other people here in the States from Afghanistan, refugees, Congo. We'll feed you enough so you can survive, but become something, why bother? So overcoming that stigma and that prejudice and that discrimination is really, I think, challenging for a lot of people. And that's what adaptive sports can really help with, that you overcome your fear, you overcome your own challenge, your own physical, mental challenge, because you've been told, oh, you can't do this. You're never going to be able to play basketball. And look, of course you can. So with Yusuf, he, I think, was a product of this culture that basically says you look kind of weird. He's polio, and he kind of walks hunched over. And so obviously you can't. And hearing the word no and can't all his life, I think is a big part of his challenge. So we've been mentoring via texting, and trying to just help coach him a little bit, along with you and Coach Pete, and just encouraging him that positive reinforcement. You can do it. You can do it. Come on, let's go. And just the little bit of relentlessness, but also pushing people beyond their limits, which I learned backing up with people when I was 18, and we had no sleep, and we had to do another show, and we had to stay up until 2 a.m. with our host families and eat the food that we didn't like and talk languages we couldn't speak. You just get over yourself, and you adapt, and I can do that. So I think he's doing better, and he's got a job right now. He's actually got a computer, and he's working for an internet company, and he's showing himself that he can do it. So that's empowering people, to thrive, not just survive, but empowering people to make choices so they can thrive is really, rewarding. And that's what I enjoy doing. So this work that I'm doing now is very rewarding, and it's It's helping me. It makes me feel good about myself, right? But it also makes me feel good about the world that, that, hey, we can overcome challenges, no matter how big or small. So.
Well, Mia, this has just been wonderful to spend some time with you. You're such a joy. You're such a
Thank you.
bright light in this world. And I hope that you're just able to continue for many, many more years.
Oh, well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. I got to say, though, that with all of this also comes, I'm kind of reaching that phase. I kind of do these phases of, I enjoy something and I love, I'm a project manager. I love to do things and accomplish something. And then I love to step down and move on to the next thing. So I'm sure this phase too will come to an end for me. What I'm looking for now is the right kind of young person, hopefully a person with a disability who would want to take on, this adaptive sports thing here in Tucson, because it's a great opportunity for someone to step into something that's, not quite as hard to start from the beginning. So I hope that we'll find people to take over and fill our shoes, right?
Right.
We
That's
got to
right.
do that. We got to retire, Michael.
No, never.
Well,
Thank you
thanks.
very much, Mia.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's enjoyed, and it's a joy to chat with you.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
See ya.